listening to The Gender Rebels.
I'm Kathleen, a cis woman and ally.
And I'm Faith, a trans woman.
Gender Rebels is a question and answer podcast that explores life outside the gender binary.
A big thanks to our Patreon supporters.
If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/genderrebels. Hey everyone, I'm Kath.
And I'm Faith.
Faith, do we have any new patrons to thank?
We have a few new patrons
Yay!
to thank, some really awesome patrons. Jeffrey S.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Charlie G.
Thanks, Charlie. Kristen A.
Kristen A, you're awesome.
And Abigail S.
Thanks, Abigail.
Thank you guys. Y'all are awesome.
And I believe we have a listener question also.
We do. We have a new listener question. This is from it's an email we got recently from a listener. I have been cross-dressing off and on for most of my life, with the earliest memories of wanting to be girly dating back to age 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I have been married 9 years and I actually told her about my cross-dressing prior to us getting married. After I got married, I sort of let the hobby habit die after our wedding day. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to more recent times and the urge to dress, etc. has been strong as ever.
Waxing and waning.
Mm-hmm. A question has come up in regards to all of this is, what drives this feeling for me? I kind of have a hard time answering this. My wife wonders if it is a purely sexual fetish sort of thing for me or someone else. I feel like the answer to this is it depends. There have been a lot of times in my life where it has been a fetish of sorts for me, and I wonder if that's attributable to the fact that it was my secret. I say this now because I'm able to paint my toes, put on makeup once in a while, and wear some female undergarments to work. That fetish aspect has gone away. It's more about something that makes me feel good about myself. I guess I'm wondering if other crossdressers experience their fetish transform into something more subdued when they begin to be open with people close to them. I view this as a healthy development for me.
That is a really good question.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of creates the urge to crossdress?
And how does the status of that as a secret versus not a secret influence that?
That is tricky. I am transgender.
You are?
I am trans. I'm very trans. I'm actually the transiest person on the planet.
That's true. You did get that word.
Sorry, everyone else. But I did identify crossdresser for a while, and I think that was because it was what I knew. It was what society kind of had as a label handy. So for me, what that kind of urge was to experience something feminine with the gender I identified with but wasn't assigned. Mm-hmm. So that was like a huge thing for me. It was just anything kind of feminine or anything sort of gender bendy appealed to me. And it appealed to me like you say, listener, when you're 5 or 6. We don't develop fetishes when we're 5 or 6, or at least if we do, it's not healthy. But generally people don't. We're not developing our fetishes when we're 5, right? You're the psych person.
Well, okay. So that's a good question because maybe that's like where the seed gets planted. Maybe you see your mother putting on pretty shoes and it sort of anchors something in your psyche. Or, I don't know, I'd heard there used to be like long hair fetishes back when women had super long hair and mothers and daughters had to like brush out their very long hair at night, and boys grew up with these very long hair fetishes, and that's not as much a thing anymore because super long hair and those massive bouffant, hairdos isn't as much of a thing. So I don't necessarily think you have a fetish at age 5, but you see and observe the world and like things and dislike things and even have aspects of your sexuality. So I don't want to say you're totally isolated from that.
Yeah.
I hope I didn't take that all off track.
No, I don't think you did. I do think that, though, when so there's a lot of people in public think that cross-dressing is just a weird sexual thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. If a 4-year-old's doing it, which many 4-year-olds out there are doing it, me included,
it's not.
And listener included, and probably a few of you listeners were doing it as well, it was not a sexual thing when we were 4.
I will agree to that.
Absolutely not.
Yes.
I think that for some people it can be a sexual thing. I think in general, for people for whom it is, it's something later in life. It's not what you're doing when you're 4. Mm-hmm. and it tends to be more object-based, fetish-wise, than it is behavior-based.
Technically, the way a fetish is described is an object.
Yeah, so it's getting turned on by pantyhose or shoes or underwear or things like this. That can happen, and there are people like that. I would say we should have like a separation of the term cross-dressing should definitely, we need new terms because I guess you could say female garment fetishist,
okay.
And that could be an FGF or something. And a CD is someone who's literally cross-dressing, because there are some fetishists who don't really, if they're cross-dressing, they're certainly not putting any effort into it. They're more just using an article of clothing for sexual arousal. And I think there's also a thing of like, I think for people who are trans or cross-dressers, or I think can experience like arousal from the behavior. Even if it's not like fetishistic. And I think that really comes from being more relaxed with yourself. And I think, I don't know, you're a cis woman. Do you get like kind of excited when you get like really dressed up and you feel kind of like, I feel sexy for the first time in forever?
Like sexually excited or just happy and
a little sexually excited? Like if you put on a lot of really, No? Okay. Well, I don't know then, because I
might
think
be the
that's
weird one. I don't know.
Yeah, you might be. I don't know. I think that I think that it's something that, again, I think some trans people, and it's usually trans women that this gets brought up, or cross-dressers, male to female cross-dressers, that this gets brought up of like kind of getting turned on by the behavior, and that's an idea that a lot of people have, that this is honestly, the reason people do it. And
that's why you're doing it, cool, whatever floats your boat.
Fine. But I think you can also be trans and do that, and kind of be a little excited and turned on by it. And I think that's also normal, but it's something that people aren't, like trans women aren't doing this because it turns them on. Because otherwise every trans woman would stop when they started taking like testosterone blockers and their sex drive went and they would stop this behavior immediately, but they don't.
If it were entirely based on
which is
a neurotic thing,
which it's not. I think it's
partially.
I think it's dysphoria, and that there is a sort of a little bit of kind of, I guess, feeling like yourself for the first time and being able to like be happy about that.
Yeah,
it's like sort of how we express it in weird ways.
I think there's a lot to be said about being comfortable and happy and relaxed.
Yeah,
and feeling like our writer wrote in, feeling good, just feeling happy. Like that certainly, it makes sense to me that you would be more receptive to getting turned on in that situation. That totally makes sense.
This is something that I've often. Not often, but like in the past few years have wondered if the idea of cross-dressing is something we should just get rid of as a society, that there is this whole behavior called cross-dressing. So I would say that I think what we traditionally call cross-dressing, I think that term exists because that's kind of like what we had in like the 30s or the 40s or the 50s or whatever.
When they used like transsexual and stuff.
Yeah, we didn't have genderqueer as an identity back then. But like, think about it. Like a non-binary person or a genderqueer person is someone who likes to vary their presentation, is someone who doesn't identify with either male or female gender, or someone who identifies as both, either simultaneously or in a fluctuating manner. And I think that is totally 100% cross-dressing behavior. I think it's just a weird holdover. Because if I were to describe cross-dressing behavior to you, you'd be like, oh, well, that's clearly a genderqueer person, or that's a non-binary person.
Well, not necessarily, because what I'm thinking of is to identify as genderqueer, to call yourself genderqueer, feels like kind of your 24/7 everyday thing. Whereas when I hear cross-dresser, I think of a hobby.
So like bi-gender. No, but I'm saying for a lot of crossdressers, I think it goes way beyond hobby. I think that's sort of this. I think when we discuss crossdressers today and use the term crossdresser or use the term hobbyist, like you just did, I think we're shortchanging what is, I think we're delegitimizing what is, I think, a legit, transgressive, non-binary way to look at gender and presentation. Because think about it, like, so many crossdressers that I've known, like, they want to pass. They value that. They have, like, their website or their online identity. They have, like, a name they use. They have all this stuff. They go out. They want to be perceived as and interacted with and treated with like they're that gender. And then the next day or the next hour, they may want to go back. And they get something out of both presenting male and presenting female. And so I think that is something that calling someone a crossdresser is like very 1950s to me. It's very much a thing I think we need to like lose and just say this is a flexible presentation that someone has. And unless I'm using the terms incorrectly, which is very possible, I think that is like at least certainly a non-binary gender presentation.
So then you did identify as a crossdresser. You were pretty active in the communities and online and stuff like that. Did this come up? How do other people feel about this?
Well, it's so funny because I remember having a conversation like in like 2003 or something. Someone I'd met on MySpace. And there's a weird overlap between crossdresser and transgender. And that is because for a lot of times in history, for male to female people, it's, whether that's presenting or transitioning, it was kind of like accepted that cross-dressing is a thing. And by the way, cross-dressing is a thing that only men can partake in. And then there's transgender people or transsexual people who are actually in the process of undergoing like surgical or medical change.
So that was the whole difference.
That was the whole difference.
There was a medical aspect to it or not.
And I remember we used to talk, I talked to someone, it was so funny, we were using the Star Wars prequels were out. And so they were talking about how like cross-dressers were like the Padawans. And then like if you were actually transgender, or transsexual, whatever term we used back then, you were like an actual like Jedi Knight. And then if you had your SRS, your sex reassignment surgery, then you were like on the Jedi Council. Like you were real.
All right.
And there was that idea of like real, and so I think I also had I remember someone once asking on another thread, they were like, what is the transgender, the male to female transgender community think of cross-dressers?
Yeah.
And I remember I replied to this and I said that it seems like the community as a whole is very hostile to cross-dressing.
Really?
But then every single individual member of that community I've ever met has been very cool and supportive and understood that this was kind of a thing. So
where's this perception of hostility come from?
I think it's just from some loud individuals.
Oh, loud people!
Yeah. And so I think there is a lot of overlap. There is a bad joke I made, and I'll make it again. And I know it's a joke, it's a stereotype, but it was like on Reddit. There's the R cross-dressing board, and then there's like the R MTF board. And the joke was, what's the difference between R cross-dressing and R MTF? About a year. And I'm not trying to undermine anyone's identity, but the joke with that is that identifying as a cross-dresser is often a key step.
It's the baby
for
steps.
People. It's the baby step.
The wading pool.
Yeah. And I think that sort of overlap, that sort of gray area, there's so much gray area between trans people and cross-dressers that to me, I think cross-dressing is a transy behavior. And I think it is something that is non-binary, definitely absolutely non-binary, and it may be bigender for some people, it may be gender flux or multigender or however people choose to identify, but like I think the cross-dressing thing is a weird holdover from when that was kind of how people had to identify.
But what if someone prefers that term? to bi-gender.
then by God, use that term.
Okay.
Terms exist not to box us in or to define us, but for our convenience. But I'm saying for someone like our listener who's like, I don't understand why I feel this desire, this need to cross-dress. And it's like, to me, that's like, because you got dysphoria. And you may not have the level of dysphoria that you're trans and you feel the need to transition, but I think there is at least a dysphoria in the sense that you're not happy with that fully binary male identity that our society has said, okay, you're a male, you'll always wear your pants, you will wear your suit, you will be happy, you will watch sports ball, you will hate your wife, you will hate your mother-in-law even more, and you will smoke cigars and watch action movie and eat steak. And I think a lot of people aren't going to like that.
Sure.
And I think someone who's cross-dressing is like definitely feeling something where that identity doesn't fit.
So this is interesting because they say something in the question where they say, I feel good. Something like, I shave my legs and have my toenails painted and wear women's underwear and like to work or something like that. And I feel happier.
Yeah.
And that sounded to me like their sort of baseline whatever mood, but the cross-dressing or the feminine details that no one can see elevates that mood.
Yeah.
And my question for you, again, I don't want to get us off track, but that didn't sound like dysphoria to me.
I think
that sounded like a plus as opposed to treating a minus.
It's weird linguistically to try to differentiate between those two in regular language.
But you would say that this person, since they feel happier with those feminine details, is treating their dysphoria?
I think that's an option. I think that is a possibility. And again, every person's going to be different. It's hard to like sit here on our ivory throne of podcasting and dictate what people are feeling.
But they did ask you, and you know this, and you've been there.
And I get it. It's cross-dressing is not a quote normal thing. It is not something that our society accepts as regular and normal. I think it's probably more common than people accept. That's one of the reasons I friggin' loved seeing Eddie Izzard's Dress to Kill when I was like 19 and in college and like still barely understanding my own anything, and to actually see like someone funny and cool and British, so like getting up and just being like, yeah, I'm a cross-dresser, I'm a transvestite, executive transvestite, you know, and it was such an amazing, empowering moment to see that, because it had always sort of been the shameful thing. And like, I think that cross-dressing still carries with it a lot of this stigma that it is fetishistic, that it is something perverted, that it is something weirdo guys do at home and they're, when they're closeted, etc. And I don't think it is. I think it's as subversive and weird and fun as, and I use weird in a good way, as like any college kid out there who's like fucking with their gender presentation. It's the same thing. It's just our society hasn't quite caught up to, I think, what the innate desire a lot of people have to break free from this gender binary, which is constrictive and I think, what's the word? Choking.
Restrictive.
I like constrictive, like repressive way to live for a lot of people, because we're not like this. There is no real gender binary. We're all somewhere in the middle. And I think expressing, when you're assigned male and you want to express that feminine side, it can be fun. It can be liberating. It can be freeing. And that's great. And I think that is dysphoria. And it may be a different type of dysphoria from what a person who transitioned feels, at least in depth, certainly. But I think it is. I think maybe it's time as a society to just say, hey, cross-dressers, by the way, you're non-binary. Or we're bringing you in under non-binary.
Or we're giving you the option to identify this way. There's a bunch of us out here. Come join us.
Exactly.
But if you prefer to consider yourself a cross-dresser and stick with that term, then you're good.
But I mean, what is it beyond? Of course it's non-binary. You're presenting something beyond, I don't know.
I mean,
to me, it is LGBTQ. It is totally,
sure.
absolutely within that umbrella. Like, it's not something separate or different. It's just to me, it feels like an older, again, I say 1950s kind of term for breaking that gender barrier.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, and I agree that the term genderqueer might apply. You're saying non-binary. I'm not sure if that applies, because this is quite binary. It's
yeah, you're right. You're right. It might be. I'm sorry if I'm using those terms incorrectly. Yeah. I gender fluid.
Yes,
maybe a better term.
That makes sense.
When I say non-binary, I mean anyone who's breaking out of that one role. And that's what I mean by non-binary. I know people who identify non-binary may use that term differently and see it as someone who rejects that binary entirely, which, good for you. That binary is kind of stupid. It is. And I say this as someone who has lived in, who went from one end to the other. But, yeah, so when I use non-binary, that's what I mean. I mean that it breaks out of those two traditional binary roles. So yeah, gender fluid, I think, would be the better term, or genderqueer. And to me, that is gender fluid. That is like the definition of gender fluid. It's something it's someone who's choosing to present one gender at one moment and another gender at another, and who's equally happy in both. That's great.
Okay. So I have a question. I have a question about the future of cross-dressing.
Yeah.
So if the bad old days were the 50s, where Steven comes home from working at IBM, and only dresses up evenings and weekends, and maybe they took a vacation to that wonderful retreat where cross-dressers and their wives, because they were all men, could go, that we saw in the show Transparent. Like, it's something that Steven only does part-time. And now you're saying there are other ways to think about this. People aren't necessarily locked into a hobby situation. Instead of it being cross-dressing, it can be genderqueer, gender fluid, or fun with presentation, or whatever.
Yeah.
In the future, let's think about Steven's grandson or great-grandson. Do you think we'll ever come to a time where someone can go to his job at IBM in a suit one day and a dress the next day?
I would long for that.
Yeah.
I think that is where we should be.
Do you think it's possible? In a generation? In two?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think if we all do our part to fuck the system up, then maybe. I don't know. It would depend on your company. It would depend on your life,
obviously,
and your situation. But to me, that's the dream, where
how are you feeling that day? That's
we can all be as gender fluid or change our presentation whenever the fuck we want, and it's no big deal. And that, I think, whether you're changing it permanently or changing it for a day or two or changing it for a month or being something else entirely, I think that's fantastic. I would love to see that. I would love to see a world where the restroom issue, or the shower issue, or the changing room issue were like less of a problem. One, because we all grew up and realized that that's not a thing. Breaking down gender binary is like not equivalent of assault or like attacking people. Like, that's just basic. And two, let's all have some more privacy. Maybe if we didn't have 1.5-inch gaps between the stall door and the stall wall, it would be less of a problem. Maybe if we weren't asking children to shower together in school, it would be less of a problem. So yeah, I think that's the dream. That's the goal. That's what I want. I want a society where everyone can just be who they are, and that can change from minute to minute, and it's no big deal.
And then my follow-up question is, say you live in that Steven's great-grandson place, time where...
Or great-grandkid.
Yes. Where you have that option. You present male one day, female the next day, male the next day, female the next day, and neither the next day. You have that option. You can. It's okay. In your 20s, thinking back to who you were in your 20s, would you have just been a girl every day? Or were you sometimes wanting...
Except for the days when I probably had a hangover. and didn't feel like putting in any effort. No, and that's just our society demanding that women put in more effort than men.
Don't pretend you hate all that effort.
Some mornings I do.
Yes, true.
I got home from a concert at like 1 a.m. last night, and I had to work at 9, and I did not do very particularly good makeup today. So,
but you weren't late.
I was not late. I put my hair in a very simple ponytail, slapped on some very simple makeup, and got out the door. But I don't know. I feel like I did enjoy, to an extent, the kind of fluidity. And because it also, for me, you know, in 100 years or whatever, maybe it wouldn't be as big a deal to transition. For me, it was. And so I found that fluidity very liberating, that I could kind of present. And I identified gender flux, a term I thought I invented, but many people invented, you know, independently.
Sorry.
That's okay. Too bad I didn't trademark it. That's a weird noise. Trying to do like I don't know.
It's the trademark noise.
I did find that fluidity like very liberating, very fun, and I did identify gender flux, trademark. No, and
get it right.
Because I liked being able to switch back and forth, and I knew that that ghettoization of cross-dressing into the hobbyist category, I knew I wasn't a hobbyist. I knew it was something that went deeper to who I was. But again, all we had back then were you are full-on transitioning, and you are ready to get the surgery, etc., ready to live your life that way.
Come out to your job and your family and your partner. Yeah.
Or you are a hobbyist. And that is like, there needs to be gray area between there, or the hobbyist. We need to accept that hobbyists are not hobbyists, and that is a real way to be. And that is where gender fluid or genderqueer comes in.
So that's interesting to me, because I thought you would say, if you'd had the option in your 20s, you'd have been girl every day. You're saying sometimes you would have presented male?
I mean, it's hard to say, but like, I knowing that I probably would have transitioned earlier, but it's also like, I'm looking back on who I was and what the times were, and I needed to, I wasn't going to jump in. I wasn't going to just hold my nose and cannonball right into this. I was one of those people who's like, I'll dip a toe in and then maybe go up to my knees. Oh, it's too cold.
So you
I'm going to run back.
You would have been wading a little more in that pool if you were able to just do that every day. But you'd still be wading in the pool.
I'd still be wading in the pool.
That makes sense.
But it was, I definitely I needed that like first time, you know, of like, oh, I'm going to walk by work on my day off.
In a dress.
And I'm like, by work. You know, that kind of thing.
This is when you're working at a gallery in Soho, and they would have been more than happy to have you.
Yeah, but I didn't know that.
It's true.
I didn't know that, and I know that now, but say Livy.
Even if you had known it, though, it doesn't necessarily mean you would have done
again,
it.
It doesn't.
Ready for
I know it. It's such a, again, maybe in Stephen or Stev in Stev's age, and you know,
a future version
in the year 2000. Yes. Because it's short for Stephanie and Stephen.
I get it.
Stev. It's STFV, Stev. You have to say
Stev. Got it.
In Stev's time, I would hope that, there is that. And people would be like more cool to do that. I didn't have that luxury. And so I needed that little step. But I knew it was like, I didn't identify hobbyist. And I do feel like that's kind of unfair. To relegate some people to hobbyists when there's other people, younger people who didn't grow up with that, who are like, I'm genderqueer. And it's like, here's someone who's 50 maybe, with the same identity, behaving the same way, identifying as a cross-dresser that a lot of people are going to think is a hobbyist or a fetishist.
Yeah, and I also don't want to have tell this 50-year-old guy, no, you're not a cross-dresser, you're genderqueer, get with it.
No. I'm just saying it's a legit feeling.
Yes.
And it's the same feeling that when this listener asks, why am I doing this? Why do I feel compelled to do this? It's because It's the same reason I feel compelled to transition. So many other people feel compelled to transition. And why some people feel compelled to, like, say fuck it to the gender binary or feel compelled to go back and forth. We have this feeling that likely we're born with. And that's probably where you started when you were 5 or 6, dear listener. And why I started when I was like 3. And it's
put
something.
A bed sheet over your head and be like, I'm a pretty bride.
Yeah, and we all take our own winding, meandering paths to get here. And I hope one day that society exists in such a way that those paths don't have to be meandering.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, they are. And I just think it's shitty that we relegate one group to fetishy hobbyists.
Okay.
When I feel like it's a legit part of this community and a legit identity, and it's based in legit feelings of what I can only call dysphoria or unhappiness with how someone was assigned at birth and how the gender binary works. And if the word for that is not dysphoria, I would like to hear it because it sounds to me like dysphoria.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool.
Yeah.
Good question.
Thank you, listener.
Question sender. Thank you.
We didn't
for
actually ask you if we could use your name, so that's why you're a dear listener.
Anonymous dear listener.
Yes, thank you for the question. Thank you for listening. Y'all, what are your thoughts on this? We'd love to hear it. Do you identify as a crossdresser? Are you genderqueer and you think crossdressers are something different? Like, let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think.
And if you're not a crossdresser, how have you perceived that group? I would be interested to, because it does feel like sort of an old-timey term. But there are plenty of people who do that now.
Yeah.
So, we'd love to hear from the rest of you.
All right, everyone.
We'll talk to you next time.
Bye. Bye. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to help us keep making more great content, go to patreon.com/genderrebels.
We have many different levels of support and lots of great rewards,
including drinks with the Gender Rebels at Stonewall.
Please leave a 5-star review on iTunes. That makes it easier for other people to find us.
And send your questions to questions@genderrebels.com or find us on Twitter @thegenderrebels.
Music for The Gender Rebels is by Jasper the Colossal. Follow the link down below or download them on iTunes today.
And for all our episodes, visit genderrebels.com.
The Gender Rebels is a Comeback Sync production, copyright 2019. All rights reserved.
And to all you gender rebels out there, keep rebelling.
Bye!